I acknowledge that I am on the unceded ancestral territory of the Coquitlam First Nation, who continue to live and care for these lands and the water and this area. I want to provide a bit of a trigger warning for this post. I'm going to be talking about the Indigenous children, the genocide of Indigenous children that happened in Canadian residential schools. If this is a subject that is triggering for you, by all means, stop the video now and go and watch something else. If you are in the midst of the grieving process because of this, my heart really goes out to you, and I can't begin to fathom or understand what you are going through, particularly if you are an Indigenous person and grew up in a home that was impacted by the residential schools in Canada. I can't begin to fathom what you're going through and what this news brings up for you. And just to the best of my ability, please know that my heart goes out to you today. In May 2021, the remains of 215 Indigenous children were found at the Kamloops residential school. And this brought to the forefront the thoughts of this terrible atrocity again. There was a response from the provincial and federal government, and there's been a public outcry, and that this is fully investigated, and that if there are more mass graves out there, that be researched and discovered. I've had the privilege of getting to know children of residential school survivors, and their lives have been hell, and I can't share the details because they were told to me in confidence, but you may have heard some of the stories. Some stories have been made public, and they're absolutely horrific and devastating to hear. The school closed down in 1969, and the last residential school in Canada closed down in 1996, which, when you think of it, wasn't all that long ago. And so I've begun doing these thoughts from the trail, and on this one I couldn't just share my thoughts. I needed to do something about it. So I looked up an article and I found 10 things that I could do, and embarked on doing them. So the first 3 things we can do, according to this blog that I'm reading from the Indigenous Corporate Training Center, have to do with writing letters to our MPs. One is about asking for a forensic search of all residential schools. The second one has to do with asking for clean and potable water for all Indigenous communities. And then the final one has to do with asking for building standards to be improved and implemented for all Indigenous people and communities in Canada. I support all 3 of those things, and I sent my letter to my MP, which I think I've only done maybe a couple times in the past. So anyways, a bit of a new experience for me. Not a big deal, not a really hard thing to do, but yeah, those are the first three things. So the fourth thing is to lower your flag or your flags. If you have, yeah, lower your flags. And I don't have a flag. So I looked it up. Coquitlam, which is the municipality next to me, they did lower their flags for 215 hours. That's the request, is to lower your flags for 215 hours in honor of the 215 children who were found in the mass grave. I wrote to the city of Port Moody just to see what they have done, and haven't received a response yet. If they haven't done that, I will ask that they do that, and I'd love to be a part of that and see it happen. So someone from Port Moody did get back to me, and the flags in Port Moody were lowered. And I just want to read what they say on their website, because I just think it's so well worded. It says, flags in front of City Hall are flying at half-mast to honor the lives of the 215 Indigenous children whose remains were found on the grounds of the former Kamloops Residential School. We also honor all Indigenous children who were forced to attend residential schools across British Columbia and across Canada, those whose lives were stolen and those who survived. We offer our deepest condolences to all Indigenous families and communities affected by trauma and tragedy as a result of the residential school system, then and now. And then it goes on to say, it's important that we all seek to understand the devastating impacts, past and present, of residential schools in Canada, so that we can all contribute to reconciliation between Indigenous peoples, the Government of Canada, and all members of Canadian society. And then it says where you can learn more. I'll put links to this in the notes on my blog. I think, one of the things that this article here points out, and I've heard people say this, is that, it wasn't, what did I have to do with that? I mean, that happened in the past. And that could be, maybe you're not a part of the Catholic Church and you're not a part of the government, and maybe your relatives never had anything to do with this. I don't know. But the thing of it is that this is ongoing. And, there are children and grandchildren of the survivors of these residential schools still alive today who were deeply impacted by that. And, I know some personally, and I know their stories, and they continue to struggle. And that's the thing. This is a current issue, and there are still things that we can do if we feel led to do them. So the fifth thing was to wear an orange shirt on Orange Shirt Day. That's a day that is set to remember children and their relatives who went to residential schools and who passed at residential schools. And so that day is held annually on September 30th. So I don't have an orange shirt, so I ordered an orange shirt, and I will wear my orange shirt on September 30th. Since the news in May of the grave site found in Kamloops of the 215 children, there's a grave site found in Manitoba, and then just today there was news of another grave site found in Saskatchewan of over 750 children. It's absolutely unfathomable. I went to the Truth and Reconciliation events back when they were happening, and that's where I first was really impacted and learned about residential schools, and the fact that a lot of the children that went to them died while they were there for all sorts of reasons. And since then, more and more information has come out about it. But you can ask any Indigenous person who, their parents went to one of those schools, or, their relatives went, or they went themselves, and they knew that children were dying and abused in those schools. Okay, the sixth thing on my list is to take a pledge of reconciliation. And so I've done that, I've signed it, I'm going to send it to them now. And I'll just read it to you. Personal pledge of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. In the spirit of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples in Canada, I, Rod Jan, solemnly pledge to learn more about Indigenous peoples and issues, continue to look forward to positive change for the situation of Indigenous peoples. Just going to scroll down here. Find ways to address the Indigenous related myths and misconceptions with my fellow Canadians. The fourth one is not to perpetuate stereotypes in my conversations or observations. And fifth is to encourage others around me to keep reconciliation an ongoing effort. That's a good one. I've kind of wondered what happened with the whole reconciliation process, and so that's something I can do. Read the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's 94 calls to action. So that's one of the points. It might even be the next point. And I haven't done that, but I'm going to start doing that now. And then 7, actively encourage ongoing support of National Indigenous Peoples Day every June 21st for myself, my family, and community. That's the personal pledge of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples from the Indigenous corporate training. Okay, the 8th thing on my 10 calls to action is to take action on any of the calls to action. So there's 94 calls to action, and so far only 10 of those have been met. So there's a lot to be done. This is something I'm just going to have to investigate further as well. Only 10 out of 94. So it would seem that there's a lot more work to be done. Okay, number 9 is something that I'm going to have to do more research on as well, but I will do it. Number 9 is learn about the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. And I'm going to go to it right now because it's interesting that Canada at first decided not to adopt this. So here we go. Again, this is on the Indigenous Corporate Training website. The declaration consists of 46 articles, included at the end of this article, the one I'm reading, ratified by the United Nations that, among other things, recognize the basic human rights of Indigenous people, their rights to self-determination, their right to create their own education systems, receive restitution for stolen lands, and participate in all decision-making that affects their interest. The declaration was adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations in 2007. Not all states voted in its favor. 144 voted in favor, but there were 4 objector states: Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. In 2010, the Conservative government endorsed the declaration, but indicated that it was an aspirational document that was not legally binding and did not reflect customary law. In 2016, the Liberal government announced its full support of the declaration without qualification, and that it would adopt and implement the declaration in accordance with the Canadian Constitution. Since 2016, the Liberal announcement of support, there has been some forward momentum, but that momentum has been hampered by some retraction and most recently by some significant opposition. Yeah, the step is to learn more about it, and I will do that. The final step is to donate to the Indian Residential School Survivors Society, and I will do that as soon as I hit stop on this video. And I'll read this to you again. The Indian Residential School Survivors Society is a British Columbian society that provides counseling services to survivors and descendants of the residential school experience and relies on the support of individuals to continue providing that support. And then finally, it asks, looking to do even more, consider asking questions of church officials on their knowledge of reconciliation. Encourage faith leaders to enact and participate in reconciliation. Share this article with your families and friends. Support more Indigenous-led community organizations. Stand up against stereotyping and continue to practice empathy and passion. I'll talk more about this in the future, but just sort of the the deconstruction of my faith has a lot to do with the way that church leaders do respond to these kinds of things. And I'll have to put more thought into it and share those thoughts in the future.
In a video on CTV News with Chief Bobby Cameron, he says that he would welcome the Pope to come and to come to one of the grave sites and to be a part of the healing process. And for some reason, I don't know why, maybe someone could put it in the comments, but the Pope supposedly isn't allowed to do that, and I don't understand that. And from what I can see, there have been a couple of times where precedent has been set where the Pope has actually made an apology. So little old me, I'm absolutely no one, but it doesn't matter. I still have an opinion on it. And my opinion is, if the First Nations people, if the Indigenous people of Canada are open to it, I would love to see the Pope come and go to one of those grave sites. And if it's a healing thing, then why not come and forget about your policy and just do something that's going to help the healing process.
It's heartbreaking to think that a religious institution had a big role in this genocide. So my point in this whole thing was to not just have thoughts from the trail, but I felt like this was something that required action. It was something, when the news immediately came out, I was overcome again with emotion and didn't know what to do. I didn't want to discuss it. I didn't want to hear from church leaders. I didn't want to hear the trite solutions and sayings from people of faith, church people. It just seemed inconsiderate. And so, I was just looking for ways to take action, and I will continue to look for ways to take action. And I want to reach out to some of my Indigenous friends and just see how they're doing. All right. Take good care. I hope this video was helpful. Bye-bye.